All right, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. Thanks so much for being here. This is Strengthening Families in Times of Perceived Crisis, a webinar presented by the CAFÉ TA Center and facilitated by our friends Kirsten Drybrough and Charlotte Armstrong. I'll be introducing them to you and vice versa shortly. Thanks very much for being here today. We appreciate it. So before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about the CAFÉ TA Center, who we are, and what we do. So the CAFÉ TA Center is hosted within an organization called the Family CAFÉ, based here in Tallahassee, Florida. We're a grassroots cross-disability nonprofit with a national scope. CAFÉ is actually an acronym for Collaboration, Advocacy, Friendship, and Empowerment, which are sort of the founding principles of our organization. And we do work serving people with all types of disabilities across the full age range. The way we address mental health here at the Family CAFÉ is through our SAMHSA-funded Consumer and Consumer Supporter Technical Assistance Center. Now, what makes the TA Center unique among a lot of other SAMHSA-funded programs you may have come into contact with is that it is not clinical or academic in the type of expertise we're sharing. It's very much about the expertise of lived experience. So just as the Family CAFÉ, the large organization, is a grassroots organization founded by people who are either family members of people with disabilities or people with disabilities themselves. The Consumer Supporter TA Center is very much about people with lived experience of mental health conditions, talking to other people walking that same road and sort of figuring out how we can share what we know about the way the mental health system of care works to help improve it and bring our essential perspectives to the table when decisions are being made. So let me, of course, like all good TA centers and funded grant programs, we have a website, which I encourage you to visit. That is at cafetacenter.net. It's a lot of great stuff on there. I'll be telling you some more about what's on there in detail relevant to family mental health once we get later into the presentation. But for now, just know that if you go to that TA trainings page there on our website, you'll be able to find recordings of every single webinar we've done throughout the history of the grant program. You can also find all our newsletters on there and other resources we've published. It's also a great way to join our mailing list, which I certainly encourage you to do if you have not. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, that's where you will find the recording of today's session. So once we're done here today, I'll go ahead and post that Zoom recording. It'll be both in the article about this webinar, which is currently on the homepage, and it'll also be on that TAC training page where all of the previous trainings are listed in chronological order. So please do check that out if you want to find the recording after the fact. A little bit about myself and my colleague John, to whom I will introduce you shortly. So my name is Jeremy Countryman. I'm the program director here at CAFÉ TAC, and I've been in that position as long as we've had this grant, which is now about 14 years. I'm both a person with lived experience of mental health conditions and also the parent of a couple different kids who have some stuff like that going on. So I've been in this world both as the person who was in a family who had a mental health condition and also as the parent. So that's the perspective I bring to this. I have with me my colleague, John Ferrone. Unlike me, he is in Hastings, Nebraska, where it's probably less warm than it is here in Tallahassee, if I had to guess. John's the training coordinator on our grant program. And what we're going to be doing today is basically monitoring what's going on in the chat and the Q&A as Charlotte and Kirsten are presenting, helping them keep track of all your questions and comments. Before I let you talk to Kirsten and Charlotte, I'm just going to say a couple more things about what we're doing here. One thing I want to emphasize is that despite the fact this is a webinar and you are in sort of attendee mode, we definitely are open to questions and comments. We want this to be as responsive to your needs as possible in this format. So we certainly encourage you to share your questions and comments, and John and I will be keeping track of those, and we'll try to make sure they are all addressed before we're done. I just saw Marina ask about the timing of the webinar. Is it an hour? We've allocated 90 minutes. If you have to leave it an hour, of course, that's fine. We like to have a little bit more time than most webinars do, just so we can have as much space as we need for any questions and comments that might come up. So, you should expect roughly 90 minutes. But of course, if you have someplace to be at the end of the hour, that's not a problem at all. We're happy that you are here at all. And of course, you can visit the recording later if you want to see the bits that you missed. So with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Kirsten Drybrough and Charlotte Armstrong from Robin Priest Live Your Truth, two experts in family mental health and two family peer supporters. And they're going to be sharing their experience and their perspective with us here today. So with that, I will hand it over to them. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Jeremy, and thank you, John. Thanks for having us. As I was mentioning before all of you logged in, Kirsten and I always love to hang out with organizations that see the importance of the family mental health story and family peer support. So like Jeremy mentioned, Kirsten and I are both lived experience of supporting someone in our family who struggled with their mental health, as well as, in my case, some coping strategies that some people might name as bad or illicit. But I call them the coping strategies that my daughter needed to get through those hard times. And like Jeremy said, I am a family peer worker, and I train family peer support workers across North America. That's my day job. But my give back is supporting families who are struggling with their mental health. And I wanted to introduce Kirsten as well. Her and I hang out an awful lot together. And Kirsten, maybe share a little bit about your story too.
Sure, Charlotte. And as well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having us. Yes, I get to spend a lot of time with Charlotte. I'm a family peer supporter, and I'm also a trainer in peer support. So what I came to know very early in my own family mental health story is that when one member of the family was struggling with a mental health challenge, not feeling great, we weren't quite sure what was going on, the entire family, or my entire family, was really struggling. And the supports for family were not for family or our connection to other families that were experiencing what we were experiencing until I met Charlotte just over a decade ago. So that's a little bit about my family mental health story. I like to say that I today have a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old daughter. My 23-year-old lives in wellness with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And that to me means that she's figured out what recovery looks for her. And is it perfect? Is it what I thought life would be? Not exactly. Is it still really good? Absolutely. And in that journey as a family, not only did I learn a lot about mental health, but I learned a lot about myself as a caregiver and a supporter. And that's where my passion is. And that's where I get to spend a lot of time with Charlotte standing on our soapboxes, or we did not all that long ago, because nobody was really listening or leaning into creating supports for family. And that's changed. And maybe I'll send it right back to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Kirsten. So I wanted you to sit for a minute and think about, what did I mean by bad or illicit? Well, that was the me of 15 years ago when my daughter was really struggling with her mental health. And what had happened, and parts of her story, she's allowed me to share because she's really proud of the work that Kirsten and I do and the company that we're part of, Robin Priest Live Your Truth. And it's through me being allowed to share little bits of her story and seeing why we so believe in the power of peer support. If you met me 15 years ago, my daughter was struggling. She was in middle school, and she had been bullied, and she wanted what was going on in her head to stop. And she was choosing coping strategies that back then I would have labeled bad or illicit. But for her, she was trying to figure out how to make it stop, how to support herself, and trying in all these different ways. And in my story, I went underground. I was terrified to start sharing what was happening for fear that I would just make it worse for my daughter. But in fact, I was struggling with my own mental health. And that power of family peer support would have made a huge difference. If I could have shared a little bit of what was going on with other families who got kind of what my world was like, I think it would have had an impact on my own mental health and giving me some tools to support myself as I was trying to support my daughter. Hey, Jeremy, can you go to the next slide, please?
I want to just take a moment and chat a little bit about what family means. Here we have family peer support and an explanation of what it is. But I think it's really important that we clarify a few words that you're going to hear often in the next hour and a half. Family to us is whatever family is to you. So if there's somebody that's near and dear in your circle that you identify as family, that's exactly who we're speaking about, and you're in the right place. Doesn't have to be held to a blood connection or a traditional model. And in fact, some of my closest family members actually are not blood connection or a traditional model. You're also going to hear a lot about us. We may say the word child. Child is exactly that. A child could be 4 years old, 4 months, or they could be 44 years old, and so on. So if you're somebody that identifies as having a parental role to an individual that you consider a child, again, you're in the right place. We're not talking about a small little 9-year-old. We're just, if that makes sense. And the last one, you're going to hear us talk about parents. And if you are in a place where you identify that you're supporting somebody in a parental role, and it's not that traditional parent-child dynamic, again, you are in the right place. That's what we're talking about. We're also going to talk a little bit about loved one. And that's whoever you identify with as somebody special in your world that you're being a caretaker with, or that you're really concerned about. So you could be a coworker, a neighbor, a dear friend, a spouse, a brother, a child. So I just think it's really important that everybody knows that they're in the right place, and we're not exclusive with that family term, and that it's a very inclusive webinar we're about to share with you.
So Jeremy, the next slide, please. And we're going to talk about what the parallel process is. And it's a phrase that Kirsten and I've heard often, and it's something that is near and dear to us. And for us, it's around, we all have our own mental health story. Each one of us who's part of our family. And it's not always the one who has the diagnosis or the one who's struggling the most that has to do all the change. We all play a part in our family's mental health story, and we all have the opportunity to make some change for ourselves. And so today we're going to start to talk about what we can do as caretakers for ourselves as we support our family members. Jeremy, the next slide, please. So I wanted to touch on the objectives of today's webinar. And for all of you who attended our November 2023 webinar, we talked a lot about trauma, and that is also available on the CAFÉ's website for everyone who would like to see it. So today we're going to start to think again about understanding signs of our own trauma as a caregiver, and what does that actually look like? How can we identify it, and maybe start to think about it? Because if you had asked me this question 15 years ago, if I had any trauma, would have told you, what are you talking about? I'm fine, I'm good. This is all about my daughter. We're going to learn about how our own trauma can impact the way we support our family member, especially in times of perceived crisis. And what do we mean by that word perceived? We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to start to talk about action strategies, like actual things that we can do to support ourselves, manage our stress, and working through those hard times so that it doesn't become like even more of a crisis. And I want to stress as much as I can, if you believe that this is a 911 crisis, we're not saying do not act like it's a 911 crisis. If you feel that you need to take your family member to the hospital, we are saying take them to the hospital. This webinar is all about just checking in with ourselves. We're going to give you a couple of things to think about before you go right to believing it's a 911 emergency. The next slide, Jeremy, please.
Well, when we think of perceived crisis, we absolutely first have to talk about trauma, because that really affects our perception of what's happening in the moment in those really hard times, and what we're talking about when we say perceived crisis. So defining trauma as a caregiver and as a supporter, I think is really important that we just spend a little bit of time here going back in time. If you would have asked me if I had trauma or how I was doing in my role as a caretaker and a supporter for my daughter during a really difficult decade, I would have said that I was fine, and no, I certainly don't have any trauma, and I'm all good, and probably would have leaned in and said, I just showed up to figure out how I can fix, save, and solve my daughter. I'm really glad that things shifted, and through my own connection with family peer support, I did start to identify not only the part that I was playing, the parallel process, the part that I was playing in the role of supporting my family and my daughter, but understanding that I too had experienced some really, really difficult things, had been under chronic stress for an extremely long time. And that actually started to eat away at my own well-being, both mentally and physically. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about trauma. To take it a little bit further, so trauma as a family member or a caregiver, when an event or series of events causes stress that may be short-lived or long-term, there can actually be a buildup and a breakdown of your own well-being. And it can happen without even realizing it's happening, because our number one job is to show up day in, day out, 24/7 as that caregiver. And I didn't realize that I was becoming a fractured version of myself. Today, I can, and I have for some time, I can reflect and I self identify as having caretaker PTSD, 100% of having trauma at the hands of what the mental health story in my family and our family mental health journey. It would have been really helpful if I could have recognized that when I was trying to show up and be the best supporter, the best caretaker, the best version of myself for my daughter who was really struggling. But that wasn't the case. When we look over here and it says caregiver, for some, never realizing the impact of caregiving and the stress has on their own mental health. Well, that's sadly more typical than not. Often it's those first few connections with a community of folks, a community where people have shown up as caregivers, as peer supporters, and are there to support one another. That's exactly what we're talking about with family peer support. That's when that trauma is first kind of recognized, and we actually realize that we too have seen some really hard things, and we too are not okay. Also, Charlotte, maybe I'll pass it off to you here to talk a little bit about the difference between, trauma doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be, you always do great on that chat.
Oh, and thanks, Kirsten. And it's just starting to think about what do I mean by trauma, and what's happening for me? Well, back 15 years ago, I had a really nervous stomach. So I was going and getting it checked for physical reasons that nervous stomach was showing up. And that was that chronic stress piece, because I was so terrified that we were going to go back to that really hard day. Maybe it was 3 weeks ago. or 2 weeks ago. I was living in fear that that night that my child was really, really struggling is going to happen again. And that's that part that trauma piece played in me, but I didn't understand it at the time. So she talked about she was really not in a great space. I immediately went to that night. If she talked about, I'm not really hungry, I'm just going to go and hide in my room, or however she described it, I would go back to, it's going to be like that night 3 weeks ago. And so all of my decision making, all of my reactions were based on what I thought was going to happen, like it did 3 weeks ago. And I ignored everything that my stomach was saying to me. I ignored my head pounding. I ignored that I was taking Tums and Zantac. Body feel better. Those were all those signs that I was getting, and yet I was choosing not to listen to them.
Thank you, Charlotte. And our next slide is going to explain why we tied trauma in with perceived crisis, and why we really wanted to just take a little time and talk about trauma and how that shows up as a caregiver and supporter. Charlotte?
So I'm going to have you think about, was there a night or a day that was really hard for you? So I always think about those nights that, my child would say, I've had it, and then locked herself in her room. And I would go, oh my gosh, what's she doing in there? Is she self-harming? Is she trying to get off this planet? So I was already manifesting it was going to be way worse than what was actually happening. 9 times out of 10, she was just had her headphones in and she was watching a video or something. But I was like, you got to let me in. I really need to see what you're doing. I'm really worried about you. Come on, can you just talk to me, please? And these were some of these conversations that I would be having through her doorway. And she would say, I just need to be left alone. Or she would go silent. And then I would be trying to pick the lock. Or I'd say to my husband, I think we need to break the door down. Again, I was making that night about what it was 3 weeks ago. And I wasn't giving her that message that I believe in your resilience. I believe that you are just taking time for yourself. And if you need me, you'll come and look for me. So my messaging to my child was really, really convoluted at that time. Because my message was, I don't trust that you're going to take care of yourself. I don't trust that you're not going to come to me if it gets worse. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is that sometimes in my story, I took what was just a hard night where she just needed space to breathe, where she needed to think about what was going on in her head, or not to by watching a movie or doing something. She needed to be quiet, and I needed to insert myself into her story, into her space, in order to what I perceived as keeping her safe. I wasn't being intentional. I wasn't taking time for myself to slow my stress down and come with curious questions. Okay, you're asking that you want some space. What does that look like? Does it look like you just want to watch a movie, or what does that look like? And then I understand a little bit more, because I was assuming I knew what she was up to based on what she did 3 weeks ago. So, and I wasn't taking care of what was happening for me, my anxiety, where I was coming from, what was going on in myself. Because remember, the only thing we can change is ourselves. We have control over how we react, how we address, and what we say. We don't have control over what our children or our spouses or our friends are doing. Hey, Kirsten, what do you think about when you think about those?
Oh, you know what? I spent years taking an evening or a day that could have been, a hard time, could have been a difficult moment. And because I didn't have my own anxiety in check, and because I was really broken down as a caregiver, I wasn't taking care of myself. We talked about trauma. I certainly had that piling up that I wasn't addressing. That I took those hard nights and what I was bringing to that interaction with my daughter was my own anxiety, my fear. I didn't like her behind a closed door. I wanted her to tell me more. I wanted to know if she was okay. I didn't like her to be out of sight because she had a history of self-harming, and I didn't trust that she wouldn't do that. So I would follow her around the house, sometimes the neighborhood, when really, I heightened the entire evening to got to the point where, you know, often she was locked behind a door. I was outside talking through the door. We ended up calling, 911, and the fire truck would come because something bad had happened. Anyways, I sure wish the me of today could have had a conversation with the me back in time, who was trying to work through those hard nights and was not intentional, incredibly reactive, unable to see the part I was playing in the family story. And that parallel process, that change that I needed to make as well, as our family went on this mental health journey, I couldn't see it. So perceived crisis, it's kind of that scary word for me. Like, I think, a crisis is crisis. But you know what? I lived fearful. I lived with my anxiety not in check. And I was very panicked during those times that things were going to get out of control very quickly. And what I brought to the moment was actually making things get out of control very quickly. I wish I would have gone for a walk, taken some space, but that's not what I chose to do back then. And we do the best that we can with what we know at the time. And you'll hear that again. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So, yeah, I'm rambling, Charlotte.
No, you're not. And I'm smiling because I was reading some of the chats, and I too cameraed up my house. There's lots of me too of those years ago, and I justified it in saying that it was keeping my family safe. Those cameras were there, and was it a little bit of keeping my anxiety in check sometimes, until I watched the video, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And I laugh at it now, and at the time it was just such a big part of that chaos. And I want to share, Kirsten talked about going for a walk, and I remembered a friend of mine calling me one day, and her daughter was just screaming in the background, and I said to her, is there any way you can just come outside and get some fresh air and step away from what's going on at home? And she said, no, I can't. And I said, is your husband home? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay. And he's her dad, and he loves her, and you don't think that the two of them can hang out while you just get some fresh air? Just, nope, I need to stay here. And the anger and the screaming was being directed at my girlfriend. Her daughter was yelling and screaming at her. And she finally said, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'll come outside, but I'm not leaving my driveway. And we live close by. And I said, okay, I'm just going to come out and hang out with you. And we ended up going for a walk, and she did walk around the block. And when she came back, her daughter and her husband were sitting on the couch, and they were having a conversation. And the whole mood had changed in the house. And I'm not saying that my girlfriend was the one that was causing all of it, but it was just changing that dance, because when her daughter normally would yell and scream at her, she would engage by saying this. And it was the same story over and over again when this happened. But at this moment, my girlfriend had changed that story. She stepped away. She had taken some time for herself. She went outside for a walk. And when she came back into the house, her energy was different. She was a little bit more calm, and she was able to then to just see where her family was at and support them through it. So again, it's what we can control. We can only control what we do. And she used that example again and again. When her life got hard, she'd just go out for a walk. And she would just say to her daughter, hey, listen, I'm just going to take a few minutes, go outside, get a fresh air. And then maybe we can talk about this when I come back. And again, just changing that reaction.
Hey,
Jeremy?
Charlotte,
Yeah.
before we move on, I'm seeing in the chat, I know it's hard to see the chat when we're talking. I can't keep up with the chat when I'm speaking, but what's coming up is people talking about the siblings having trauma, and we like to talk about the forgotten child. Maybe, do you want me to talk a little bit, or did you want to address that one?
Keep going, Kirsten, and
Yeah, and then you'll add, again, gosh, and like if the me of back then or of today could have spoken to the me back then, because yes, as I said earlier, it affects every member of your family, especially if you're all housed under the same roof. And in my own family story, I have 2 daughters, and Charlotte's is the same. And we talk about the forgotten child, and in my story, that's my one daughter who um, tried not to cause any issues for our family, tried not to step out of line as a teenager, and who saw some really hard things and was shaken to the core many times at the hands of what was happening, within our family home. And um, I did a couple of things back then. Um, I didn't take steps to recognize that she was hurting as well, and that she needed attention from me, more attention that I was giving. And I take it even a little further. I actually spun this little home of secrecy where I would share with my daughter because she was witnessing things, and I would bounce things off of her, almost like bring her in as a third parent, because I didn't want anyone else to know what was happening outside of our home. And that, along with witnessing and events and chronic stress, really, really took its toll on my daughter. I'm really lucky to say that, she's still moving through that, still trying to work out how that comes up for her and her relationship with her sister. And it's going not so bad. But again, I sure wish I would have gone back in time and recognized how much she was hurting and how much this was actually really, really affecting some crucial years in her life where she was preparing to go on to college, graduating high school, supposed to be lighthearted and have lots of laughs, and coming home was a hard place for a long time. Yeah. Charlotte?
No, and I too, this forgotten child subject is such an important one that Kirsten and I talk about quite often. So I have 2 daughters, like Kirsten mentioned, and my youngest, she was the one that would tell me, I'm fine, Mom, I'm good. She didn't want to add any more stress to my life. And she got herself up and went to school. She did all those things and never, ever wanted to add any more stress to my life. So when I'd ask her if she's fine, she would say she is. And I was so consumed with just hearing that she's fine and continue on, not really listening to what she was saying, not taking notice. And I wish I could go and do a few of those redos, and it would have spent a lot more time validate what was going on for her, supporting her. Because I would say things like, we're going to be taking care of your sister for the rest of our lives. And so my youngest thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be my life forever. Because she witnessed some really hard things too. And she went through a time where, she had to step away from all of us and just work on her own self-care and her own mental health. And I think as a mom, if I had handled things differently when she was, 12, 13, through her teenage years, through her graduation, it wouldn't have shown up as strong as it did in her 20s. And so what does that look like in her 20s? Well, we talk a lot openly of what it was like for her in her teenage years, supporting herself, witnessing what she saw. and living with that chaos, which she didn't sign up for, right? That's not what she wanted. And not being able to share it with her friends, exactly what was going on. And I tried family therapy with her. I tried to get her to go to counseling. It wasn't the right fit for her. And I didn't spend enough time finding what that right fit was. When we know better, we do better. We share that line all the time because I was doing the best I could at the time with the tools I had.
Yeah, before we move on, I'm just going to add something quickly, because somebody was asking, which you answered, if we go there and revisit what happened during those hard times today with our daughters, the forgotten child, and they both handle it on their own terms. But the funny thing that also has happened through my connection over the last 10 years with Charlotte is our daughters have gotten to know each other, and my oldest daughter is a hairdresser, so Charlotte's daughter goes there often to get her hair done, and they have great chats on this subject, and they connect, and so it's kind of organically just happened that way, that they're providing peer support to each other, but it's kind of a safe place where they both can and they laugh. Believe it or not, they laugh, and they because it is quite a bit further in the rearview mirror now, but they talk openly about it with each other, and that's healthy. Yeah.
So it's that peer support again showing up. It's that lived experience of being a sibling to somebody who struggles, and the power of that, because not everybody can relate to what it's like to live in that world. Hey, Jeremy, the next slide, please.
So here we're going to talk about strategies for managing stress and trauma. And ideally, this is before those hard moments, hard evenings, perceived trauma, or perceived, it all happens. So this isn't to do in the moment. That's what I'm trying to say. But practice self-care and make yourself a priority. For years, I thought if I was taking care of myself, that would be a selfish thing to do, and that I had really broad shoulders, and I only really need a few hours sleep a night, and I'm okay. I've got a lot on my plate to support my daughter because she's very unwell, and I sure wish I would have made myself a priority back then. Again, because I wasn't okay, I was fractured, and I wish I had a true practice of self-care. I wish I walked more. I wish I stepped away. I wish I didn't lose some connections with friends that I was afraid to be around because I thought they might ask me questions of what's going on. So I wish I did things that mattered to me and filled my own cup, my own heart. But back then I didn't, and that would have given me more strength for managing those difficult times. The other point here, seeking out support just for you. It could be peer support, it could be a trusted friend, and or clinical. The most difficult thing that I had to deal with, one of the most difficult things, was the shame and blame that I kind of cast upon myself as a parent back then, because I truly felt if my children were not thriving, then I was failing them somehow, and I wasn't providing something that they needed. I was falling short. And wow, if again I go back to, like, if I could have met the Charlotte of today a decade ago, and or the me of today, and had some conversations, drank some coffee, threw things out there, it really would have changed my entire perspective, and it sure would have got me thinking a lot. And the street cred there is that that the person I was speaking to had been where I had been and kind of made it out the other side, or looked to make it out the other side, and was managing life differently than they thought, right? So I talk about, seeking out support, whether it's just looking resources that you have in your community, But a trusted friend, I remember deciding at one point, I'm going to actually pick one friend. I'm actually going to tell them all the ugly, all the reality. And I asked that friend, I remember asking that friend if I could share some things with her and she could be my person. And it was going to be hard and it was really heavy. And she had to really think about it. She was going to be up for it. And she was like, sure. And anyways, for a couple of years, boy, that trusted friend, that one person to speak to before I found family peer support and found a community of like-minded parents, that was a lifeboat that I didn't realize I needed at the time as well. And hey, if you're not doing well, you're not sleeping, you're living on your last nerve, you're breaking down physically. Um, look for services, speak to your doctor, look for clinical help. We've got a lot on our plate as caregivers, and it makes sense that we're not okay. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is it's finding what works for you. And I wanted just to circle back to those first two parts, that practicing self-care, and self-care looks differently to everyone. And one of the things Kirsten and I do when we're working with families is we start to have them look at what stress looks like for them, because there's good stress, there's the stress that we can manage, and we have people start to look at labeling, is this light stress or medium stress or like severe stress, and what do we do in order to before a stressful event, what do we do during a stressful event, and what do we do after a stressful event? And when you start to think of that in terms of, okay, this is like a lighter stress, and what should I do for myself to get through those moments, so that when we can start to have like a really hard day with hard stress, we've got a better shot of managing ourselves. And it's a great exercise that we walk people through if they're interested in it, and it's a great exercise that I check back on myself, and Kirsten and I spend a lot of time working together, but we are each other's peer support network. And this November, I had a lot on my plate and a lot going on. And then I had some added stress, and I saw myself revert back into the old me. That reactive brain kicked in. Some of those hard labels that I used to give myself. And it was such a great acknowledgement that I needed to take a little bit more time for myself and start to work through a little bit better self-care for me. And that too is take some time for myself. I walk my dog. It's checking in again. And that takes me to that isolation part, because sharing with Kirsten what was going on, and she's a great friend and a peer supporter, the old me 13 years ago wouldn't have opened up to a Kirsten. I was so scared to add more damage to my child that I thought if I shared with anybody, it would just make it worse. And connection is that antidote to shame and blame. So I was layering on that I was a bad mom, bad parent, bad everything, that I had truly caused what was going on in our house. And opening up to that trusted friend, reaching out to something that works and sharing what was going on. Because this is about me and what I need. It's not about trying to wreck it for my child. It's about talking about what's happening for you and how can you get some support for you so that you got a shot at getting through those those stressful nights, those hard days. So it's, again, thinking about what can I do to avoid that isolation part. And the last point is the focusing on the change that we can do. What are our boundaries? What can we do in order to change that part of the story? So what do we mean by that? Well, it looks differently for everybody. But in my family story, when my daughter was having a really, really hard night, lots of yelling and screaming usually took place. She'd shut her door. She wanted space from the rest of us just to think it through. I was pushing that, no, you need to keep your door open. No, you need to do this. And when she felt that she wasn't being seen or heard by what she needed at the time, that's when her anger would show up. And I, of course, would keep pushing it and pushing it for her to quieten down and settle down. And 9 times out of 10, my actions and what was happening for her would just feel even more of a crazy experience in our house. And the reason I share that is because I could have walked away. I could have said again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I want you to hear it. I could have said to her, I trust you in this moment that you're going to do what you need. And I trust that if you need me, you're going to come and ask me for my help. Again, it's focusing on what I can change in that story. And I also want to talk about in some of those nights when I was right in her face trying to get her to calm down, she said some really awful things to me. Get away, you're a terrible mom. She just wanted space from me. And again, I was that, I'm here, I'm just going to do whatever I can do to get you to stop. And when her and I have conversations about what was going on back then, my daughter will always say to me, you know, I didn't mean what I was saying. And I'd say, I know you didn't. She said, I just needed you to step back and give me some space. You just didn't believe in me that I could get through this hard night. And I said, no, I didn't believe in it. Again, it was my anxiety that was talking. Hey, Kirsten.
Yeah, you know what? I think I can get stuck on this slide. So I think I'm going to say, let's move on because I'm going to try to be a better time manager. But yes, thank you, Charlotte.
So what do we do in order to not go to that place of where our anxiety is taken over? Our reactive brain is taken over. And these questions aren't in any order, and maybe some resonate more with you. But these are some of the things that we ask ourselves now, like Kirsten and I, when we're going through a hard night or a hard moment in our family. Is this a 911 crisis? Or is this my own perceived crisis? I do that anxiety and wellness check on it myself. Where am I at with my anxiety? So when I talked about November, my anxiety and my wellness was not in check. And that reactive brain of mine kicked in. And it was really taking a look back on what could I have done differently. I want to again say, how do I want to show up in this moment? Intentional or reactive? So remember what I said, was I sending out that message to my daughter that I trust that you've got that resilience within you to support yourself? Or am I giving her that message that I don't believe in her? I don't believe that she has the ability to support herself. So again, checking in, how do you want to show up? And then are my own expectations in check? Again, am I sitting in the moment of what's happening in the here and now right now? Or am I thinking it's going to be that hard night 3 weeks ago? Where am I at with this in my head? And if I am thinking it's going to be that a night like 3 weeks ago, what is my justification of it? Is it my anxiety that's saying that? Like, really ask yourself these questions. Kirsten?
Yeah, and the last few, am I making boundaries clear, or am I trying to put boundaries around my loved one? You know, that goes back to, we can only control our own actions. We can control how we react to that situation that Charlotte was talking about, how we want to show up. So when we start thinking about boundaries, think about you're not trying to control your loved one's actions, especially when you're about to walk into some perceived crisis in a difficult moment, because the only thing you have control of is your own action. If you can just pause and identify, am I adding chaos to this moment? Is what I'm about to say or engage with, is this going to heighten everything? Why am I saying this? Really think about being intentional and what you're about to add to that moment. And what are my assumptions and biases in this situation? Am I taking it to worst case scenario? And my gosh, going back a few years ago, I would, if my daughter was going to be home at a certain time, or I couldn't get a hold of her, wow, could I go to worst case scenario? And my biases were not in check. Old things were coming up very quickly because, again, I wasn't taking care of myself. Even not all that long ago at times when things got hard. But a cute story is that my daughter was living in the mountains, Canmore, Alberta, and for a couple of years. And she I was getting a little worried about her. My spidey senses were up a bit. And she called me really early one morning. I really screwed up. I'm not sure what to do. And I instantly just like my stomach dropped. And then she continued to tell me that she told this boy she was dating that she had some really strong feelings for him. And this was the I really screwed up. My head was not going there. My head was going, something really awful was happening, and she was engaging with things that were not good for her. But yeah, so it made me smile and laugh. Yeah. But if we can pause before we engage, wow. I often put my hand on my heart and I take a deep breath and I just kind of center myself because I need that moment of clarity before I engage. Yeah. Next slide, please, Jeremy.
But you know what? Hey, Kirsten, I'm just gonna pause for a second. I was just reading Gail's comment. Maybe we can just because it just kind of flows from that last slide. So Kale asks about what happens if your child is struggling, but also being physically and verbally abusive to you. And the reason I wanted just to bring that up now is because in this part, I think of the chaos, I think of the boundaries, I think of like those parts that we've just talked about and how we can only control ourselves. We can't control them. And as hard as it is, Gail, if you can just say, hey, I trust that I hear that you're struggling. I see that you're struggling, but right now this physical and verbal abuse that you're dishing out on me is not working for me. And I'm just going to take a moment and step away. I really care about you, but I also care about myself. And those kind of things that you have to start to think about. We work with a family where the mom had to have a restraining order on their adult child. Actually, there's two families that we've worked with where that had to be the case. Hardest thing they ever had to do. And yet, in both cases, it's their son. And they acknowledge what they did, the child. And they have a relationship now through texting. And the one parent that we worked with he's now allowed to see his mom. Like they've worked through it. They both went for some support, and now they're able to have a relationship together, like physical back again, in a way that is even more meaningful. My daughter's had anger and she punched holes in our walls, and I never really truly addressed that with her because I chalked it up to her mental health issue. And was it or was it not? So I encourage you that your life matters, Gail, and for all of you who are experiencing something like that, whether it's physical or verbal, and sometimes some parents have to take a hard stance and say that I'm not going to do this anymore, whether it's a restraining order or however that looks. But your life does matter too. Next slide, Jeremy, please.
Just real quick, I wanted to mention, I was going to talk more about this at the end, but I think it might be relevant here to remind people that Charlotte and Kirsten are available to talk with people individually. And I'll go more into the details about how to do that at the end. But if you have some specific questions about things that are going on with you in your household or challenges in your caregiving relationships, you do have an opportunity to talk to them individually at no cost. And I'll talk more about how to do that at the end. But if you feel like, oh, this is something I need more help with, there is a way to get that. And we'll give you a little bit of detail about how that works in the last few minutes. So am I on the right slide now or not?
Yeah, this is the right one. Thanks,
Yes.
Jeremy.
Okay.
So here's some tools, and there's many tools, but it's also exploring what tools are going to work for you. So that take 10 rule. So it's however you want to talk about it, to just ground yourself, to take that moment. Okay, I need to check in with myself. And so I grew up down south. So I do the 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. And by doing that, it takes me back to a time when I was a child, when life was a little easier. And it just gets me, my breathing slowing down, and it just gives me a place that I can take a moment, ground, and say, okay, where do I want to go with this moment? So I encourage you to think about what might work for you, whether it's breathing or grounding, or just look at how can you just pause, slow your breathing down before you make that next step.
And validate, that's one of my personal favorites to, in those times of hard nights, if you can approach your loved one and validate where they're at. They're not, don't dismiss their feelings or what they're feeling, or, but to actually validate, say, wow, it looks like I can actually sense you're having a hard night. I can feel it just in your body. And no, I don't know what that looks like, but I want you to know that I'm here to support you. Let me know if there's anything I can do while you work through this. To react with anything less than validation is to create disconnection and to take a hard night into more of a perceived crisis evening. Yeah. Charlotte?
Yeah, the stay calm and be patient. Oh yeah, better, easier said than done. But what I want you to think about is when we walk into a room, we have energy about ourselves. And if we have that heightened, anxious energy, the rest of the room feels it. If we walk in with that anger energy, everyone in the room feels it. So if we can be mindful of coming in with a little bit more of a calmness, we have a better shot at validating, at that patience piece that I want to talk about too. I see that you're having a hard day. Do you want to share what is happening? As opposed to saying, oh my God, you look like you're so struggling. Because you're going to get a different answer in how you present yourself and how you show up and how you start to ask those questions. But validating is the biggest thing for Kirsten and I. Is I hear that you had a hard day today. Do you want to share a little bit about what was happening? And then listen for what they're going to say. Don't listen to respond. Like, really listen to what they're saying. So if you've grounded yourself, if you're coming in a little calmer, you have a shot at actually listening to what they're saying, as opposed to you're already thinking about what you're going to say in order to fix the story or fix the situation.
And have a plan B. I wish I could have gone back in time and kind of had a solid plan to lean back on in those really difficult times. And I mean, that can look many, many ways. That can, in my house, that could have looked like my husband stepping in and saying, hey, Kirsten, you know what? I can sense you're not up for this tonight. Why don't you go for a walk? I've got this. And take some space. I'll deal with this right now. Or plan B could have been, knowing that I have a relative that my daughter likes to hang out with and is having a really difficult night. An option on those difficult nights is to maybe go over to her aunt's house and hang out with her kids and maybe just get some space from our house and our family. Or it could mean something completely different, where you're going to access the crisis stabilization unit. That's something here in Manitoba, where she could be safe and talk to some clinician and spend the night in a safe place where she's being monitored. Lots of ways that Plan B could have worked out, but without a Plan B, things can escalate really quickly.
The other plan is one that you've waited 4 months for your child or your partner or whoever to see this awesome clinician. And they go to the first appointment, they say, I don't like the guy. And the old me would have said, but you're still gonna go. This is the best one. Why doesn't it feel like it's the right fit for you? And actually listen to what they're saying. So that's another one of those Plan Bs. And Kirsten touched on that, when to give space and when to take space. Because when, I was given the opportunity of, hey, listen, I've got it tonight. Why don't you go and watch that movie? Why don't you go out with your girlfriends tonight? You've said no 10 times. They really want to take you to that movie. I 9 times out of 10, I would have said, no, I got to stay home. I wasn't giving her space and I wasn't allowing myself to take some space. I was just so right into the trenches and I just couldn't see past what was happening in my house.
And listen to your gut. That's always a really important one, whether it's embarking on one of those hard nights, hard days, or you're trying to listen. A service provider is sharing with you, or whatever it is, listen to your gut. So if you're taking care of yourself and you have your anxiety in check and you're practicing self-care, and something's just telling you that, you know what, I got to stay close tonight because I'm not feeling good about this, don't dismiss your gut. That's an important one too. Yeah.
Hey, Jeremy, the next one.
Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I know it's true.
I was going to say, I love this slide because back in time, I would not have been open to this. And I hope you're all open to this, especially those that are really in the trenches right now. And I think it's something you need to hear. And our lives matter too. We have our own recovery and our own path. And I'm just going to touch down quickly on this one, but not only the person we're supporting has their own path of recovery, but as a caregiver, when you've seen trauma, experienced chronic fatigue, chronic stress, there's some recovery that needs to happen within yourself, all for yourself, through those hard times and kind of repairing yourself to be whole again. So I'd like you to remember that you have your own recovery and your own path. And sometimes, I know this is a hard one for a lot of people to grasp, but sometimes your recovery is not, your recovery can occur even though the person you're supporting is not on their path to recovery yet. I know. So try not to tie yourself in sync with the person you're supporting. And I'll leave it there because I know that's very debatable, but that can happen too. Charlotte? Oh, I'll do the next couple, sorry. We have the right to feel safe in our own home. This is our right as homeowners, as people that we have the right to feel safe in our own home. And that may be around putting our boundaries up with what works and doesn't work for us and how we are treated as caregivers and what we are comfortable with as caregivers. Doesn't mean putting boundaries around the person you're supporting. We have the right to say no. And I remember hating at times knowing that things were going to explode and be really difficult. And it was hard to say no. But you know what? We have the right to say no, and that's don't think out anything other than that. Charlotte?
And I just want to say that we have the right to our own boundaries. And if that is that, hey, I want to live in a safe house, I encourage you to start to look at how can you create boundaries that allow you to live in a safe house. So just to start thinking about it, we have the right to our own support system. I hear so often families saying, my child doesn't want me coming to this. Well, that's not up to them. This is your own support system that's separate from your child's. This is your own support system of supporting you as you're a caretaker, as you're a caregiver, as you're a parent, whatever your titles are. This is about you and your support system. And this is an interesting one, this last one. We have the right to not fix, solve, and save our person, our family member, but to instead support their empowerment and their recovery story. It wasn't until I stopped trying to fix my daughter and instead tried to support her. And I said tried, it took a lot of practice and a lot of patience with me, but eventually I got it. My role was supporting her as she learned what her recovery story was. And when I changed that within me, and we celebrated when she started to figure it out, and we shared when it was harder for her, but it was when I stopped trying to dictate what it looked like. And again, that empowering, that supporting her empowerment, that's when the story changed. But the story also changed in my family when I started to make change for myself, when I started to take better care. Everybody else started to notice. And we started as a family having more honest and open conversations about each of our mental health story. That's when I started to hear more about my youngest, what was happening for her. That's when my oldest started to share a little bit about her different choices for supports for herself. And I wasn't coming in furious, but it was with a more of a curious lens. Again, our lives matter. So next slide, Jeremy, and it's our last slide, and we're going to start the Q&A. I want you to think about giving yourself grace. And these are some things I want you to think about as you finish off this webinar with us, as you go forward into the rest of your Wednesday. Our self-care is not selfish. Our self-care is a gift we give ourselves and our entire family. And we do the best we can with the tools we have. And when we know better, we do better. And we matter too. So I wanted to open it up. Jeremy and John, I know that there's some questions and some comments. And this is really about where you want to go for the rest of you here. Any questions you have, we've got a good, 20 minutes left.
Yeah, so if you have any question or comment, feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat, or use that Q&A function there that's available in Zoom, and we will get to them.
Charlotte and Kirsten, I wanted to go back to a comment made by Jenny earlier on. Was it Jenny? I can't remember the name. I think it was Jenny. And she said, going through a crisis the first time is really scary. And the more and more you go through it, it becomes, she didn't say it this way, this is my words, it becomes old hat, less scary. We've got 97 people on today, and I can imagine that there's some people who this is all new to them, and it's very, very scary. And I guess on their behalf, I just want to ask if you can just take a couple minutes to talk about when and how it became, or if it ever did become less scary for you going through these crises.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that, Charlotte. And, I can totally get where Jenny's coming from. And I think going back in time, when those things were so scary, they were also, and I can only speak to my own family story, they were also new to me, and I didn't understand what a panic attack looked like, or delusions looked like. But I think what really added to how scary it was for me is I really felt that I was the only one on this planet that was able to keep her on this planet during those years. And that if I took my eye off my role, my job as a 24/7 caregiver, I quit my job, I stopped seeing friends. I think the pressure I put on myself to be 24/7 vigilant and how scary that was. When I started to, you know what, I'm just speaking from my own story, but when I started to believe, two things happened. When I started to believe there was more than just me here on this planet, keeping her here, and whatever higher power you believe in, that there was a higher power that was also working on this with me. And then when I started to educate myself, build tools, change my approach, look more at my actions, I'm only speaking for myself. For me, that's when things started to shift a little bit and became less terrifying. Yes, they were always scary. And you live in fear of the next moment or trying to get through the day often. But those were the two things that really shifted for me. Charlotte, did you want to add?
And I think of, when John, you're giving us that question, I go back to like the worst night ever. And I can go back there pretty easily in my head. And I remember sharing that story with a friend who was horrified in what I was sharing. And so that added even more angst to how I was feeling. But what was interesting about that night is it was not the worst night for my daughter. In fact, she was like, that was a nothing night, Mom. She has it didn't have that same impact on her that it did for me. And it wasn't until I started to share with and I know we're pushing family peer support, but it wasn't until I shared it with somebody who had lived experience, who validated the impact it had on me. And then we started to discuss, what that night was like for me. What was coming up for me and what did I need in order to be able to better support myself if that night happened again. And I didn't share that, like that self-care piece or that sharing with a peer or whatever. It was 5 years before I actually started to address what had happened and how can I support myself. And I think that if I had done that sooner, I would have had a better shot getting through the next really bad night or the day, because I hadn't addressed it. I was still living in fear with that trauma piece. And then I wasn't giving myself the tools of what to do when it showed up again. And it was interesting when my daughter shared with me, it was a nothing night for her. And it wasn't lessening what I had felt, but it was always, there's two truths to the story. So, there was 4 of us who experienced that night. We all had a different interpretation of it. And it was about what could I do to support myself through it. Now, with the other hand, Kirsten and I've seen a ton of really scary nights, more so than a lot of people have. And in our job now, supporting family peer workers, but also in our lives, we have the tools so we can get through those hard nights so they don't have that same impact on us. And we're able to, continue on with our lives without it impacting so greatly like it did before. So I encourage you, if I could encourage myself 13 years ago, spend some time, look at how stress impacts you, spend some time. What are your go-to reactives? How do those serve you? Are they something that serves you well or not so great? And really start to evaluate, where do I need some more tools of support so that I have a better shot of supporting myself in those hard nights?
Here's a question that occurred to me that I think we touched on a little bit, but maybe not directly. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your understanding of generational trauma is in the context of, just from my own perspective, right? I'm a person, like I said at the beginning, I have my own mental health history, and I'm also parenting kids that are now, in their teens and 20s who have their own things going on. And I think it can be difficult to kind of get a handle on what me as a parent, what is me reacting to things that I'm kind of bringing that are my own baggage versus what am I bringing to it that's a reaction to what's happening in the moment. And those are kind of two different things, but they also, talk to each other and interrelate on some subconscious level. And I also feel like, you know, even for people without mental health histories, they have sort of their own baggage or their own experience or their own things that happened to them when they were growing up that may have been traumatizing, even if they don't think about it in those terms or kind of frame it that way. And, I know many people have had the experience of suddenly realizing, oh, now I sound exactly like my dad or my mom when they said this to me 30 years ago. How do you advise people to kind of get a handle on, staying in the moment and focusing on what is and being able to get a handle on what is baggage they're bringing to their caregiving relationship from their own trauma and their own experience, which I know it's kind of like a different thing. Like if you're a parent with hypothetically no issues, and you're caregiving for somebody who has something going on that's a challenging mental health condition, that can be, traumatizing, difficult in and of itself. But I'm talking more about not only dealing with that, but dealing that in the context of whatever it is that happened to you in your own history and development that you're bringing to the table. How do you advise people navigating that kind of complexity? And I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
I'll start, and then Kirsten, you can jump in. And this is this again, the power of family peer support. So when my daughter was struggling and we were going to see the clinical parts, they all wanted to hear your family history. Well, tell us your family history. There's got to be a reason why this is happening. And so you start to think about what's going on in your family and how this relates to your child. But where I go often when supporting families is they start to see patterns in themselves that are things that were coping strategies for them growing up. So in my family story, both my parents struggled with alcoholism. So my go-to coping strategy is that walking on eggshells, making sure everybody is happy in my family. And that was something that I learned as a child, growing up in the family that I grew up in. And the reason I bring that up is I didn't understand that was who I was until I started hanging out with other parents who had a similar story. And we started to share that. And it took me on a journey of starting to learn more about myself and what I was bringing to my family from my childhood, from my coping strategies, from whatever that looked like. And so the boundary thing was really difficult for me because it went against everything I grew up doing because I was a pleaser. I wanted to make sure everybody was happy in my family because the version of, when alcohol showed up was scary. And so it's not until you start to look at yourself and look at some of the things that you grew up with or you do. And for me, I started to learn about that ACEs study, that acute childhood experience study, and started to learn a little bit more about myself and what my coping strategies were. And that was an aha moment on changing how I parented, because I parented in a way that I had to make sure everybody was in a happy place. And it wasn't until I started to parent focused on the moment and not bringing in those things that of my past. My family also swept everything under the rug. We don't talk about things. So I, again, brought that into my family. If we don't talk about it, it'll go away. Well, we jokingly call our house the red table. There's not one topic that's not available to come on that red table. And we chat in a non-judgmental way. But the me 13 years ago never would have done it. And so it's spending some time on yourself and learning, you know, who I am, who was I as a child, and who I am as a parent or an adult, or who I am as a participant in this family I live in now. Kirsten, you want to add?
Yeah, you know what? I think you covered it, Charlotte, but I just noticed in the chat that Anam, I hope I'm saying that correctly, has put a couple of things in speaking about his daughter who has psychosis and how difficult that is. So if it's okay, I would just like to respond to that one. Is that okay? Because I did see it come up a couple of times. I was going to say, you know, I'm hoping that in your area there are some resources. There is a community that you can tap into. I know that where I am from, there's a great resource called Peer Connections Manitoba. Prior to that, it was called Schizophrenia Society of Manitoba. And they have some really good supports for family, specifically for family. Yeah, and I hope that those really scary moments for you may get more manageable with the tools that you start to find, perhaps, or the community you start to build, and the lessons you learn from other families. But one of the things that Charlotte and I always support families with is not getting confrontational. I'm certainly not suggesting you do this, but sometimes folks spend a lot of time trying to give their reality when their reality is not the reality of the person they're supporting if they're struggling with psychosis. And that, you know, trying not to dismiss what they're seeing or what they're feeling or what they're experiencing, because it 100% is their reality. And just learning those tools, how to have conversations through difficult times where you're supporting them and supporting yourself at the same time, and creating a connection where everybody feels safe. Yeah, did you want to add to that, Charlotte?
I think we're going to turn it over to Jeremy. I'm mindful of time.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And thank you to everybody for being here today, and of course for being so open and willing to share about what's going on for you in your own situations. I know we're talking about things that are stressful and can be scary, and sometimes, you know, opening up about that kind of thing fits in that. And we're honored by the fact you're willing to, you know, come on our platform and share with us what's happening for you. So before we run out of time, a couple of things I want to just remind you about. First of all, we'd love for you to check out our online workshops, our Support for Families series that's available on our website. If you visit our TAC trainings page at CAFÉ TA Center, you'll see it there as a link. It's also, the website is there, right there on the slide. So basically, Charlotte and Kirsten developed for us a whole lengthy 5-module sort of support guide for people in supportive relationships in their family with some of the mental health condition. It covers a lot of the stuff we talked about today and way more. And the cool thing about it is that not only is it a PDF that's broken up into different chapters that address the different topics, but they're accompanied by online videos. So you can go on there, you can watch the videos, you can rewatch them, you can, you know, do it in what order it makes most sense for you, watch the parts that are most relevant to you. We encourage you to engage with that and take advantage of it. And I'll certainly give you more information about that in an email I'm going to follow up on our webinar with. So please do check that out. And of course, as I've been alluding to a couple times today, Kirsten and Charlotte are both available to talk with people individually. We've had them do 3 awesome webinars with us over the last I don't know how many months, I guess starting back in October. And those have been really helpful and wonderful conversations, but I know there are people out there who would like to have a little bit more or have an opportunity to get some support about what's happening in their individual unique circumstances. And that's something we've contracted with Kirsten and Charlotte to provide. So this is something that's available to you at no cost. You can see both of their email addresses there on the slide. Kirsten at allinfamily.ca or Charlotte at robinpriest.com. Of course, you can always contact me at the CAFÉ TA Center, and I will put you in touch with them if that's something you'd like to take advantage of. Certainly encourage you to do that. So with that, that pretty much brings us to the end of today's webinar. Of course, we'd love to know what would be meaningful for you, what would be helpful for you, topics you'd like to see us address. We have a little more than a year left in our current grant cycle. So if you have suggestions about things you would like to see us address in that time we have left, definitely drop us a line and let us know, and we can see what we can do to make it happen. Finally, one last time, there's how to find all of us. CAFÉTACenter@gmail.com is the way to reach out to us here at CAFÉ TAC. And of course, the recording will be up there on cafetacenter.net just as soon as Zoom is done processing it. I'll go get that link as soon as we're done here, and I'll put it both in the article about this webinar and on that TAC trainings page. So with that, thanks very much once again, Charlotte and Kirsten. And thanks, John, for being here and helping us keep track of everything going on in the chat and the Q&A. And I will look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Stay well.